Now that we have done our quilt top, maybe a very small quilt top, but then we need to quilt it. Because the definition of a quilt is that we have 3 layers. We have a quilt top, padding, and backing. So I will be having on a live sample that little rail fence block, and then I have a little piece of a cotton padding and a lining of the backing on it also. And I will be demonstrating a couple different ways to do quilting. So we can do quilting using the walking foot, or some machines we have it dual feed foot also, depending on what model you have. And I'll be showing that one on my live demo. We could do that using the walking foot. We could do cross hatching. We could do stitching the ditch stitching. And also we have stitches that are called hand loop quilting stitches. So I will demo those ones in the machine. But there are lots of different options. So depending on what machine you have, you may have different options available. So look for the live video for that one. But just a little tip. If you have the machine that can use the digital dual feed, which is that big foot with the motor on it, there are lots of additional soles available, things that you can replace the standard sole. One of the newest ones is a 1/4 inch one. So there's a guide that from the needle center position, that guide is 1/4 inch from the edge. It's a great one to use quilt binding, but I also heard people using that one for piecing as well.
Well, there are 2 major ways of quilting. We can either use the walking foot, sometimes called the even feet foot, or we could use a free motion quilting. So let me first talk about the walking feet. This is the most kind of a standard, most common type of a walking foot, where we have a little handle, a little arm that goes over the needle clamp. And when the needle goes up and down, the teeth on the top of the feet will capture the top side of the fabric and move it through at the same time as the bottom feet dogs will move it on the bottom side. There's also a little hole in the back, which is used to attach a quilting guide. So it will just go back on that one. So that is one of the most common kind of ones that we can use. The only limitation on this one is that if you use it for zigzag stitching, or then if you use the most extreme sides of the needle swing, the most left or most right, this one is really not designed for that. We should only kind of stay sort of in the mid-range on this one, because the arm otherwise starts hitting that screw on the needle bar. But then a Baby Lock has a Deluxe walking foot, which is a little bit more versatile. It's also much heavier duty. So this one is actually, you can feel it when you take it out, that it's a lot heavier. But also the arm on this one goes further out. So even if my needle swings all the way to the right, it's not still hitting that screw on the needle clamp. But other cool thing with this foot is that it comes with these 2 guides. So we have one for the left and one for the right. So I don't have to get it separately. But even more cool thing is that this one comes with 3 interchangeable soles. So the standard one is attached to it, but I can put an open toe or stitch in the ditch sole also. And there's a little screwdriver that comes with this set. And that screwdriver is just used to loosen the screw on that foot so that we can change those soles. And it is a little bit more expensive than your standard walking foot. It's pretty much almost 3 times more expensive, but you really get 3 times a foot plus the 2 guides. So, and it is a much heavier duty foot. But it comes in now in a really nice packaging. So here's the foot, and there's a place for the guides. And then there's a screwdriver to do the guides. This is the little clamp that holds the guides in place, and the interchangeable soles. This is a really nice one to be used if you use the standard walking foot. My machine came with a digital dual feed. It is kind of walking foot on steroids, because this one has a motor that will run the belt. So it will, the belt pulls the top layer of the fabric. But not just like the normal walking foot is, this is an adjustable one. So I can have my belt to take more fabric or less fabric. Because sometimes, even if my machine is in theory pulling the same amount on the top as bottom, with some fabrics and some paddings, your top layer tends to still creep up towards you a little bit more. Well, on this one, I can adjust that one. It's also great for sewing on velvets, same as all the other walking feet as well. This one comes in all the machines that it comes with the standard sole. And these are just the snap-on feet. All you have to do is just to snap them in place or then take them out. I also have an open toe sole on mine. Then I have the couching guide, couching package on my machine. So it comes with the little yarn couching sole. And then one of my favorite ones, Stitch in the Ditch. Again, this Deluxe walking foot came with pretty much those three already. On this one, this is a similar kind of setup I would have for my digital doll feet. And then there's a fifth one, which is a great one when you put in binding on, because in this one, when I have needle at the center position, my guide is 1/4 inch from the center. I've also heard people using this one on the piecing as well. Most times I just used my 1/4 inch foot or my standard foot for the piecing. We do have just a standard Stitch in the Ditch foot also, but when you have a quilt sandwich, my top layer wouldn't be pulled out as much, so I prefer to use this Stitch in the Ditch foot. Well, can I use either one of these ones with my machine? Yes, I certainly can. And on these ones, I just had to remember that I would need to use the little extension, little adapter, because these ones are low shank feet. My machine is a high shank, but I can use any low shank foot with an adapter. But I most times use this digital doll feet because it has a little extra options in there. I can adjust it as well. And I can also attach a quilting guide. This foot doesn't come with the quilting guide, but you can purchase this an extra accessory. And it comes with this little extra piece that is screwed onto the top part of the foot. And then I can put the guide either left side or right side. Now I have my quilt sandwich. So how would I quilt it? So let me first go on to some of the threads that we could possibly use. We have a lot of options what we can use for quilting. Very commonly we may use quilting thread because that's what it says. And these ones are normally 40 weight cotton threads. So I have, this one is a Floriani one. And then I have this one, it looks like it's actually a little bit heavier. It's a 30 weight Mettler thread. Then I have another 30 weight Madeira thread on this one also. That's just a little bit heavier. Here is a Mettler 40 weight cotton thread. So any of these ones I could use for quilting. But I'm not limited just for those ones. I have some other samples that I have gotten during the years. This one is really thick. I think this may not even be in production anymore, but I just put it as a sample on this one. You don't have to always use cotton thread. It's just kind of tradition that we have cotton fabrics, cotton padding, cotton threads. But we can use also polyester thread. And this was made for quilting. This is a poly quilter. And it is really thick thread. It's a 19 weight. So really thick one. I'll talk about needles a bit later on that one. This one is one of the newer Wonderfil threads. It's a 40 weight. This one is a cotton. It's a really nice, very high quality cotton. Here's another larger spool. I have the King Tut, one of the older ones. I've had it for a while. There's another Wonderfil that is a 50 weight. So this is a little bit thinner. I could use it for piecing, but I can also use this one for quilting also, as well. Here's a 40 weight quilting master quilter from Wonderfil. And then Madeira, I have a spool which is Aira quilt. And this one is 100% polyester. Yep, we can put 100% polyester on the quilt also. Then, of course, we could use the 50 weight cotton like we were using the piecing. Other options, we could use monofilament thread. I use this quite a bit because I'm not that good of a quilter. So this ways I can hide my stitches a little bit more when I use a monofilament thread. And yes, we can put the monofilament in the bobbin also. There are some instructions tell you, oh no, only on the top. Some people say, oh no, it will wear out your tension discs. I talk with a number of the technicians and the machine manufacturer engineers, and they kind of look at me funny when I ask that why couldn't I use monofilament. Only thing when you put it in a bobbin is that wind it the slowest speed. And on my machine, I can set the speed before I even during the winding to have it the slowest speed. Takes a bit longer to wind it, but that way it doesn't stretch it so much. Also on this one, only wind your bobbin about halfway, because if you wind it all the way full, it just gets so tightly towards the end, it might break this bobbin. You can kind of tell your machine starts almost kind of getting hard time after it gets about beyond half full. So just stop that time. This is really thin thread. There is a lot of thread on this one. The monofilament, or sometimes called invisible thread, comes on two colors, clear and smoke, and different manufacturers. This one is Reuleaux, this is nylon. That was a sulky, that's a polyester. What's the difference between nylon and polyester? Polyester has a little bit higher melting point. So if you use a baby quilt or somewhere that it will get put more into the washer and dryer, the polyester might be a safer bet for that one. Also, polyester doesn't get yellow over time. Other option for thin threads is silk thread. And I have this box, and I can tell that it's an older box. I've had it for most likely 15 years. I still have the book, and I read this book by Diane Kaudinsky. She's an amazing quilter. And label what I have in here at the time, it was $69 for the box. You can tell it's still neatly on the box. The box is getting yellow. Because I read her book about quilting, and this is the thread that she partnered with Reuleaux, and they had this silk thread, 100-weight silk thread developed for her. So I thought, oh, I'm gonna use that one. Well, so far this is still in the box. So maybe one of these days I will get it out of the box and use it on my quilts. I have, however, used some of the silk thread on my quilting. And that time I also put a really thin needle in the machine. It just made beautiful, tiny, tiny stitches. But we have kick my camera here. My point is that I have lots of options that I can use for quilting. I sometimes use metallic threads, sometimes I use embroidery threads. Well, we can also call some of the heavier. I was going thinner ones in there, kind of medium weight down. We can of course put 12-weight cotton, or there's a 12-weight really shiny cotton, not shiny cotton, shiny metallic. Well, these threads you would need to have a larger needle. On these other ones, I would most likely want to use a sharp needle. Again, definitely do not use universal needle or ballpoint needle on quilting. We had to go through all these layers, and that universal needle is just not sharp enough. It will put a lot of pressure on the machine, and also it's a dull needle. It's like I try to hammer a dull nail, or the bent nail or dull nail into a wood. It's really hard to go. So sharp needle works the best. You can even get a special quilting needle, which are made for that purpose, as the name says. They're very sharp. But then Microtex works great. Again, if I put heavier thread, I need to put a larger needle. Microtex only comes up to 90-14. So if I go these really heavy ones, I may need to go to top stitch needle. I know lots of people like to use top stitch needle on all quilting. It really isn't, in my opinion, and even talking with the brother technicians, they even kind of looked at me funny when I said that I would use free motion quilting the top stitching needle. And they said, well, why do you use that one if you only use thin thread? Because that eye of the top stitch needle is twice the size as in your normal needle. So there's too much slack. So you may get sometimes skip stitches on some of those threads. So I kind of, after talking with the technician, I figured, well, they make the machines, they know better. So I'm trusting their word on this. Again, whatever works for you, use that one. But I'm just telling some of the things what I like. Again, that's what I like on sewing. I had to put a disclaimer that there are many ways to do one thing. So when I use this really thick thread, that is when I will be putting these larger eye needles. Whether it is top stitch, metallic, or then this one says Decora. They were originally really made for these glamour threads, but it has the same large eye. So I'll be using some of those ones if I use these thick threads. But normally I would just put my quilting needle 90-14 or Microtex 90-14. Other option you could also use is a jeans needle. Kind of funny, jeans needle. Well, jeans needle or denim needle, they were developed for sewing on thick, densely woven fabrics. Well, quilt sandwich is kind of thick and pretty densely woven when we have all those layers. So yes, jeans needle is a really great quilting needle also. Paula Reed that we have had on our shop couple times, she always tells to use the on our classes 80-12 jeans needle, because a jeans needle, other than having designed to go through dense layers, but it also has, the shank is a little bit less flexible, so it doesn't bend the needle as easy, so it doesn't break as easy. So jeans needle is another great choice for the stitching. Well, then we can go wild also. Instead of just using single needle, you can put a double needle. Just have to remember the back side of the quilt would not look as pretty, because the double needle, we still have only one popping, and the popping thread will be like a zigzag look. But if it is a wall hanging or something that you don't really care how the other side looks, that just gives a totally different look on your quilting. So again, lots of options. So I'm gonna get started and I'm gonna demo on a couple different ways of quilting. Well, we have many ways to do quilting. And quilting really refers to attaching these 3 layers together, because we could hand tie it, we could hand stitch it, but I'm only gonna concentrate on the machine stitching. So we could use the walking foot, which will be then using the feed dogs to pull the fabric through. That's a great for straight lines and maybe slight curves. But if you want to go a little bit more decorative stitching, that is when you want to do free motion. So I'm gonna, in the first part, gonna talk about different ways to use the walking foot. As for stitch, we could use as the straight stitch, or we can also use some of the decorative stitches. And one very often one use is the serpentine stitch, because it makes it a little bit easier to sew. In case even if your lines don't stay perfectly straight, you can't really tell because the line is curvy. So here's just some examples of the straight stitching, like a channel quilting, and then I have the decorative. Many often I see people say, oh, my machine has a stippling stitch. Yes, we have multiple stippling stitches in the machine as well, using the feed dogs. But this one that is on pretty much every computerized machine, it is maximum 7 millimeters wide. So really is a decorative stitch, but it is kind of like a micro stippling. Yes, you could sew rows and rows on those to make a little background fill, very dense fill. We have on some of the machines that moves the fabric sideways, we have also larger meandering type of stippling stitches. But I'm gonna mainly concentrate on this first part using the straight stitch or then the serpentine stitch. For that one, I'm gonna be using the walking foot. On my machine, it's called the Move It foot, digital dual feed, multiple names for it. This is different from your standard walking foot, is that it's like a mouse with a tail. We need to plug this in the back of the machine, because that there's inside of this foot is a motor, and the motor will bring the belt, move the belt, and that takes the top layer of the fabric. All of the walking feet, no matter which one it is, whether it is your standard walking foot or this one, we need to attach this right into the shank of the machine, which means I need to take my foot and my ankle out. So I put my hands on the front of it. I will remove the ankle and I'll put that in a safe place, which is on my case the top of the machine. And then I will put this one, the shank. Important thing is on this foot that I will put it straight, that is not in an angle. The same with the standard walking foot. So I'm just going to try to keep my hands away. It doesn't work very well when you have a camera in front of it. So I'm going to first just hand tighten it, and I'm keeping as straight as possible so that it's flat against the shank. And I'm going to wiggle a bit. And then, yes, you want to use your screwdriver to give a little close, a little tighten on that screw. And I'm using the multifunction tool that comes into my machine. We have this for sale in the shop. You can also get for any machine. These are great for taking the stitch blade out, and then also if you have an embroidery machine, tighten the screw in the embroidery hook. But I was using it on the one position because that will then tighten my screw. I get access easily. If you have a standard walking foot that the arm goes over the needle bar, just a little tip, make sure that your needle screw is tight, not just finger tight. Again, do not tighten it so much that you will break the threads on that screw. We don't have to go with all your strength, but want to maybe give a tiny little tug, because that arm can rest over this bar for what holds the needle in place. And when it vibrates, if the needle clamp screw was just finger tightened, it could vibrate loose and your needle could fall off. Or just a little tip. Well, mine, I don't have this one because it uses a motor. There's nothing to go over the needle bar. But then, sorry, my machine just, my echo mode turned on my machine. I've been talking too long, so I have an echo timer in 10 minutes. My machine takes a little nap. So I just had to kind of wake it up. So then this one I do need to plug it in, because if I don't plug it in, that belt is not gonna run, and it actually hinders on the moving the fabrics. So it will be actually worse than not even having a walking foot. So let me plug that one in. So it just plugs in the back of the machine. And when I plug it in the machine, my machine knows. I'm gonna just move the camera a little bit. So machine knows that it is plugged in, and I have a DF showing. So this foot comes with some of the models, and it can be added on some. Pretty much when I mean some, and it's always best to check with the manual or our shop, we can tell if you can add it on your machine. But there would be kind of like the Unity, Crescendo, Dreamweaver, Journey, Dream Creator. There's several of those bigger machines. The ones that I will usually kind of refer, the ones that have the big screens. Okay. And also, whenever I plug this foot in the machine, my machine, because it knows it has this foot, it disables some of the stitches. So some of those decorative stitches that go a lot of back and forth, and especially the sideways, those ones can't be used with this foot. So it is really a safety feature as well. The foot comes with the standard sole, and there are snap-on soles. So this one has some markings. The very, very original ones didn't even have markings, but then they started to do these markings. And then we have some additional. The second sole that was made was the open toe, because it gives a lot better visibility if I do stitch in the ditch. But then if I do stitch in the ditch, my favorite one is the stitch in the ditch sole. Anytime I have something to help me, I will use that one. So I'm gonna use that. So multiple ways to do the quilting. One of the ones on using the walking foot, I could just do, I guess I'm gonna do on this one as an example, stitch in the ditch. But I could just do a straight line quilting. It's used often on the modern quilting. Like on this little sample, I had just sewn straight lines. Then I could use even the standard foot, use the side of the foot as my guide. That will work as well. This is often referred as cross hatching, which is really straight lines just going crisscross. So on this little wall hanging, I had quilted my border that way. So all I did on this case, I marked one line on both directions. And then instead of marking every line, I used the seam guide or quilting guide. This one on my foot, it is an extra attachment. So I have the one that goes on the right side. I could also get the one to go to the left side. The brother quilting guide package comes with both the left and right side. So you can either get the baby lock for the one individually or the brother that you get both. But all of these ones, they come with a little attachment that I have screwed onto my walking foot, and then I can put the guide onto it. So that way I don't have to mark every single line. I can just use this guide for the next line. So it's really great tool when you do parallel line stitching or cross hatching. So I'm gonna sew in the first sample, I'm gonna sew a little bit of stitch in the ditch. So let me set up the machine for that. I just had to realign my camera and so that I can get hold of my foot pedal that I can sew. So this one I have, I put on my dual feed foot, I put this stitch in the ditch sole. And it has a little guide, so I can guide this blade right next to my stitching. And where I want the stitch to go is on this case on this white fabric, on this lighter color fabric, because my seam's being turned under towards the left side. So I want my stitching to go right on the ditch. I've also turned on my machine the guideline marker, and I turned the secondary, the sub guideline off. So all I have is the main line, and I put it at the center position. So it may not show well in the camera, but it gives me a little extra guidance because I'm sitting a little bit further out. Let me see if I can put the camera further down just a little bit. I'm using still that green thread, so you may see some of the stitches. Again, that is absolutely okay. We can use that one. But if you want to have the stitches to blend in more, then you may want to use the monofilament or the invisible thread. And this specific spool, kind of want to mention that I like to have this one spinning, because if I put the thread coming, again, doesn't matter if it's standing up or sideways. The position doesn't matter whether it spins or not. What I mean spinning is that if I take the thread from the top on this, so every revolution it gets a little twist. But if I have the spool spinning, then it will not get those twisties. And I found that this spool, especially if I don't have it spinning, I will get those knots after a little while and it breaks the thread. So very often I get this comment or people say that, oh, my machine doesn't like invisible thread. So often kind of I try to say, well, we just have to treat them a little bit special. These threads are kind of unique ones. So this spool likes to be spinning. This one, I can't have it spinning because it has those notches inside. So if I have that one on a spool pin, it will get caught on those notches and prevent it spinning. This spool is a cone shape. This one, I like the thread coming straight up, whether it's standing up or horizontal. So just depending on the spool or thread. So if you have trouble one way, try rotating the spool and maybe that will help. As for stitch length, I could use my standard 2.5 millimeter, but I often go maybe even 3 millimeter. And especially if you use heavier threads, you may want to have a little bit longer stitch length on that one. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm gonna do some stitching. So on this case, I have my guideline marker as well on this one, but I'm really kind of also looking to guide. I can just use that guide. And again, I said I don't always do my best stitching in the camera because I'm a little bit further away and in an angle. So let me cut the threads there. And oh my gosh, I'm surprised myself. That's just how those tools really help me. Even though I wasn't really seeing very well, but see, all my stitches, I would be proud to do this on my real quilt. I have those stitches right on the ditch. And I have light green thread, so it shows a little bit. That is exactly what I'd like to have. And here's the underside of the stitching. Okay, I'm gonna do another type of stitching, and this time I changed to the open toe foot, just for visibility. So I'm gonna go on my machine, and on the quilting stitches, there's this cool serpentine stitch. So, and the default setting is 5 millimeters wide, 2 millimeter long stitch length. So I'm just gonna leave those settings as they are. So let me go ahead and stitch a little bit on that. And the important thing on this one is don't look the needle. Just look, kind of get the guidance, whether it is the side of the foot or if you mark the line. Just kind of look the guide, because if you look the needle, you kind of want to start wandering the fabric and then your stitches may look a little bit odd. But that is another great way to do quilting. It's a little bit more forgiving, even if my lines are not perfect, that way they will still show up very pretty. Well, there's another question is, well, how would I tie on these stitches? Because if I have a quilt like this case, if that was my edge of the quilt, I could start from here and my binding will be then covering it. But maybe I have a quilt block that I'm starting to stitch in the middle. Well, how do I secure that stitches? Well, this is what I learned from Paula Reed. She's a real amazing quilting educator. We have had her a couple times in our shop. And this is a tip that I learned from her. So let me get my machine back to normal settings. So if I wanted to, I'm gonna pretend that I have a seam that I want to do in this one. So instead of me starting to stitch right at the beginning, and I'm gonna see in here, I see my lines on this one. So I would be starting, sorry, I'm gonna move it a little bit. I would be starting right at the beginning of that seam. And one option could be that I could use the stitch in place function, the tie-on function, but it still makes a bit of a knot. So here's a trick that I learned from her. I'm just going to lift my pressure foot up a little bit. I'm going to use the knee lever there, and I'm going to go about 1/4 inch after that seam. And then I'm going to hold my thread tail. Let me lift the pressure foot up so I can give a little tail. And I'm going to put my needle down, needle up. And I still have my pivoting function on my machine. So let me turn that one off. So what I did, I pulled my popping thread up because I want to have both sides to be pretty this time. So now I'm going to hold this one down. Well, I would want to go reverse. Well, sometimes the walking foot doesn't like to go reverse too much, but we can go a little bit. If you have the digital dual feed, we have a lever on the side that I can disengage the belt. So let me lift that one up, and then I can go reverse. But I'm going to go reverse with tiny stitches. And I have programmed on my machine on the number 1 stitch, I actually programmed the setting that my stitch length is just 0.8 millimeters. So I'm going to select that stitch for my memory. So now I'm going to hold down the reverse button on my machine, and I'm going to go reverse. I'm holding those thread tails, and I'm going to go reverse until the point that I want to start, then continue stitching. And this thread tail, I could either bury it inside, or in my case, I'm just going to snip them right on the top. So those tiny stitches have now given me just a very secure, and then I'm going to go over with your normal stitch length. So I just hit reset on my machine to go back to 2.5, or I could go longer if needed, but I'm just going to 2.5. So see how I went over those ones. And then I would do the same thing if I get onto the end point. Maybe I decided I want to finish on where my previous stitching was. I will go back onto that stitch. And one option that you could do is that you could even program one of the straight stitches for that setting and go between those stitches. But now I'm going to do that same kind of tiny stitches about 1/4 inch back, and then I can cut my threads. So that way I have secured both of the ends, and they're very neatly secured. And then on this side I could either bury those tails. If I had not used a thread cutter, I could even have left the longer tails. Or I may just do, sometimes I'm just lazy and I snip them right beside it. So they are secured and it's not going to be too bulky. So that was just a great tip that I learned from Paula Reed. The next quilting technique I'm going to show is the hand loop quilting. What that means, I have a stitch in the machine that looks like I have hand sewn it. And on this one, what you see on the top side, it is actually a bobbin thread. And bobbin side, you have a continuous line because it's still a continuous thread. But the top side, the piece that is invisible thread. I put monofilament thread on the top of the machine on a needle thread, and I have a nice change of black thread so that we can really see in the camera better. But whatever thread you have in a bobbin, that's the one that would be showing up on your top side. And we have several of those stitches in the machine. So when I go down on even my first group of stitches, there's one Q stitch, quilting stitch. When I select that one, it says hand loop quilting. I have that same stitch also in the group Q, the machines that have that group also. We have several of those quilting stitches put on this group, and here I have this stitch as well. On my machine, only difference between those two is that on the default setting, this one is in the needle at the center, when on the number 1 group, it is a needle at the left. But I can still move my needle anywhere I want. It's just how they were programmed to start with. If you have the upgrade 1 kit for your Solaris or Lumine, there are 3 additional stitches that came with that one. We have 3 new hand loop quilting stitches. And only difference between them is how far those visible parts are from the invisible part. These stitches are kind of built in already so that I can't change the stitch length, and I can only move my needle position or tension. But see, the tension on this one is really, really tight. Why is it tight? Is that because we want to pull the bobbin thread on the top side. If I have my needle thread at the same tension as normal at 4, I most likely won't see too much on that needle thread, the bobbin thread on the top side. So if I use one of these stitches that was already built on my machine, which has the normal tension, I usually go either 6 or 7 on my top tension. If you go beyond that one, then that weaker thread might break, or other option is that it will start puckering your fabric a little bit. Well, things that affect on this one. One of the things is thickness of your padding and type of padding. I had done, this is like you see, there's a little scrap. I had done a test on this piece of fabric, just muslin I wrapped around a piece of padding, and I thought, looked really good, perfect. I took my sample that I was stitching different kinds of samples, and I stitched on this one. And then I noticed that, well, why didn't I hiccup in there? Couple places I didn't get the perfect stitching. So I went back, took my sample, changed using my same settings. I sewed on other row, still perfect. I did another row here and the same thing. And then I wonder, well, what happened? Why in the same thread, same settings on one fabric, I get different? Well, actually the fabric was the same, but padding wasn't. This padding is a little bit thicker. And sometimes you have a little lumps because it is cotton padding, so there might be some little extra pieces there. This one was much thinner and kind of a smoother type of padding. So I got much smoother stitching on this one. So again, it wasn't that the machine was doing something wrong. It was just my padding was a bit different. So just want to point those out that sometimes you may kind of see that it wasn't exactly perfect looking. I had to kind of have an advertisement break brought to you by our sponsors. If you want a true hand lock quilting stitch other than doing by hand, that's when you need the Baby Lock Sashiko machine, because that's all it does is a hand lock quilting stitch, and it is an amazing. Even though the machine only does one stitch, there are lots of other techniques we can use with that machine. But that is perfect because in this case, there is nothing between those stitches. The only thing you see is the bobbin thread. And yes, the bobbin thread is going to be solid on one side, but your top side looks like it's been hand done, and always perfect spacing. I'm going to show on this one, I'm going to stitch a little bit with this setting, and then I'm going to show also some of those new stitches that if you have to upgrade one on your Solaris or Luminate, that how those work as well. So, okay, I have threaded my needle with the monofilament thread, and just a little tip about threading it. Sometimes the needle threader doesn't like this thread because it's sort of a curly one. So I may give 1 or 2 tries, and if it doesn't, then I just manually thread it. The clear monofilament is a little bit tricky to see. So a little tip is that if you take a Sharpie and put this thread tail on a piece of paper, and just to color that tip of the thread with the black Sharpie marker, it's a little bit easier to thread. The smoke color monofilament is a little bit easier to thread. So I just manually threaded mine. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it doesn't with the needle threader. So I usually give 1 or 2 tries. So let me go ahead and stitch with this kind setting. I'm using the standard, the one that comes pretty much any computerized machine. So I have that standard stitch selected, and only change I have done is to tighten the tension to 6.4. So see how this stitch works. It goes like a forward, and then it does forward, backward, forward. And when it does this backward stitching, that is when the bobbin thread is being pulled up. And that's the reason why I have to have a little bit tighter tension in the needle as well. And let's cut the threads there. So that just pretty much looks like I had just hand sewn, and oh my gosh, am I good. Let me show some of those stitches that I have on my machine because I have to upgrade as well. So this is the first one of those hand lock quilting stitches. And in this case, all I have to do is really start stitching. The default on this one is needle at the left position. I could move it if I wanted, but I'm just going to leave it there. And let me do a line on that one. This one is a bit different. It makes that tiny, tiny stitches right next to each other, and then it skips. When it does those tiny stitches next to it and right beside each other, that is when it pulls that bobbin thread to the top side. Let me put a little bit more speed on my machine. I cut the thread there. So that looks pretty much the same. Here's my thread tails kind of got caught a bit, but here is the stitching that I have done with that one. That's the one. There we go. I'm going to skip one and do the very last one because I have 3 options on these new stitches on mine. So let me do another one. It's just the only difference is that on this stitch, the visible part is longer. So it looks like I was just stitching a little bit longer stitches. So here we go. So they kind of look like a hand sewn. Underside, yes, it is a continuous line. On this first one, it looks a little bit denser because it goes back and forth on this one. This looks more like a straight line. But that is a great way to imitate the hand lock quilting stitch. But the trick was monofilament on the top, and on my machine I use the thread director, so no problems with my monofilament. I've used spools and spools of this one that way.
Another basic method for quilting would be free motion quilting. And we have lots of feet available for that one. Again, there's lots of different ones depending on what we do with it and also personal preference. Some machines may have come with the clear quilting foot, some may have come with the open toe, and some may also have a stippling foot which has a tiny hole, or then maybe even an echo quilting. Some machines we have multiple, some may come with one, some may come with none, but lots of different options. Also, you can add on all the machines, we can add the Reuleaux quilting foot. And these ones, you just have to make sure that if your machine is a low shank or high shank, that you will buy the proper one. Really the same thing also on this, the stippling one and open toe. They come on two ways. The clear one, this one only comes as a low shank, and the same with this echo quilting. Well, you can use this with the high shank machines also, because we can use the adapter with the little screw. So any low shank foot that will mount onto the machine directly, we can use those with this adapter. And all those machines that have the high shank, all the new machines, they come with this adapter. Other helpers that can be used for free motion, this is when we drop the feed dogs and move the fabric manually. Typically just we use a straight stitch. But then also we have lots of additional options what we can use to help our stitching. I put a picture of a free motion grip that is available for the Brother and Baby Lock machines. Actually, it is made by Brother. And then we can also have lots of other generic items, quilting gloves, different kinds of finger grips, the wide extension tables. Those are really handy to give a bigger surface. Or like on mine, I have the koala cabinet with the insert, so I have a really nice flat area for quilting. And then other ones are these So Slip, or there's other brands also, but quilting sheets. They're little Teflon sheets that really will help to keep the fabric sliding better. And I will demo those ones also. And then of course the quilting rulers, oops, actually are missing in there, quilting rulers that can be used with the ruler foot. Well, then also we can do quilting, other form of quilting would be echo quilting, and that is handy to use this echo quilting foot that I'm showing on this one. And then there's a kind of hybrid. I wasn't sure where to put this method, but this one would be using a quilting leather roller foot. This is a kind of odd looking foot. It was designed really to sew on leather, but it can be used as a quilting, kind of a meandering type of quilting. It's not very good for very, very tight corners, but it is sort of a kind of a free motion with feed dogs, meaning that we'll be using the feed dogs to move the fabric, but this little roller allows me to move the fabric fairly easily. So I'll be showing a little demo on that one as well.
I'm gonna show some of the major other category of quilting, which is a free motion quilting. Whether it is stippling or meandering, which I've done in the background on this quilt. I also use the free motion just for thread painting, so really the same method. Sometimes I do try to go a little bit more of a pattern. Again, I'm not really a quilter, so I don't have fancy patterns, but let me just demonstrate the techniques. And it's one of those things that was the most humbling experience for me ever. Because I had sewn pretty much all my life. I learned to sew so soon after I learned to walk. So for me, when I looked at videos and things on the TV and some of the educators, and they just look at, oh, here all you do, you drop your feed dogs and then you just start going. And I thought, that looks simple, I can do that. So I set the machine for free motion, and I took a little quilt sandwich. That's a quilt sandwich when we had the 3 layers. I took one of those ones and I started doing free motion. Oh my gosh, it was the worst stitching I think I've done since I was 5 years old. They definitely didn't look anything like a free motion quilting I want to show to anybody. So the free motion is one of those kind of techniques that might take a little bit practice. Again, some people are more natural than others. I definitely am not a natural for it. So the things that I showed you, those have been a number of hours of playing with the machine. And if I have been a longer time that I've not done free motion quilting, then my stitchings are never as good in the beginning. So again, practice makes you better. So it's good to, if you haven't done free motion for a while, to set your machine, take a little quilt sandwich and do a practice one. Luckily that time when I was practicing, we had 2 Labradors that like to, when they drink water, half the water goes on the floor. So I used to just make little placemats for their water bowl, and when they got all soaked and dirty, I threw them out. Well, those were those quilt sandwiches that were so ugly that no one else would be able to, they were not this good enough to show to anybody, but my doggies don't care. Well, the quilt sandwich I'm using is really a pot holder size. It's a bit tiny one to practice. The better size would be a fat quarter size. Don't go into your baby quilt or large quilt for your first one because the handling all that fabric makes it a little bit more difficult. So some of the tools that are helpful, and one of the ones on my machine, I have a collar cabinet with an insert that is made for this machine. That way I have a nice smooth surface. You can also add an extension table, whether it is the one from the manufacturer, Brother or Babylock. They make really nice extension tables. Brother calls it a white table, Babylock calls it an extension table. Also, the So Steady, they make that acrylic tables for any machine, and they can be ordered in the different sizes. Just let us know in the shop what model you have. Doesn't matter what machine you have, we can order one of those for you also. But they definitely are helpful for the space. My machine, I'm kind of really lucky at the moment. I have over 13 inches of space for quilting. So I can easily do a large queen size quilt. However, I have done an oversized queen quilt on a machine that had about half the space as this one. Because that was done at the time that only the long arm quilters had this really, really big opening in the machine. More you have space, easier this is to handle, but again, doesn't mean that you can't make a large quilt in a small space, because we're not really moving the entire quilt. All we are working is in a pot holder. Rest of the quilt is just around on the area. And some of the tips that I learned from Paula Reed was that if you have your table located so that the back of it is in the wall, and maybe even the left-hand side of the table is in a corner, that way your quilt doesn't drag off the edge on the sides, because the right side is kind of held up in here with the machine bed, but the left side and the back, if you have something to prevent the quilt to fall off, will be helpful. And I kind of bundle that quilt on in front of me. Paula Reed has a really great DVD, and I don't know if we still have them in a shop, but I'm sure we can still order them. She calls it the fluff and stuff. So instead of rolling it into a roll, which I did try also, again, multiple ways to do this. So try different ways and then see which one works for you the best. But I kind of found that for me, just to kind of stuff in the whole quilt in here on the machine bed and then having my hands beside it will make it easier for me to just to move that pot holder size of a piece of material. The rest of it is just around there, just to sit in doing nothing. And then I move to another spot to continue. Well, for free motion quilting, obviously we need to have a free motion foot. We can't use the walking foot. So I will take my walking foot out, and depending on the machine, your machine may even have come with some of the free motion quilting feet. If it didn't come with one, we can always add one. And we sell several ones in the shop, different machines, but also there are some generic ones. And then if you do the ruler work, which is a form of free motion, and we have really great teachers in our shop to do that one. So those ones have specialty ruler work feet. My machine came with 3 different free motion feet. The open toe, the stipple one, and then also the echo quilting. These 2 are made for high shank feet. These are available also on the low shank. What high shank means is that screw that my feet will attach, or my ankle will attach. That screw is a bit higher up. So that just means that the place that this foot mounts is higher. So if I put the low shank foot, my foot would be sitting way too high, but this way it's in the right position. This foot, however, is a low shank foot, even though it came with my machine. But my machine also came with the little adapter. So in this case, I would put the adapter first, and then this this screw that came with the machine that will attach my low shank foot. So with this adapter, I can use any low shank feet as well. But this one has those extra lines that helps to keep parallel lines for eco quilting. Of course, it's a great foot also if you are using more three-dimensional quilt that may have appliques or some pieces that may get caught onto the open toe foot. That is why we have different kinds of ones depending on the technique. This gives a really good visibility, but obviously I can only use needle at the center position with this one. That's why they call the stippling foot. Even has a letter C for that one, because if I select a stitch that the needle is locked in the center position and I drop my feed dogs, my machine tells to use the C foot. I can still use the O foot as also. So all of these ones will mount straight onto the shank. So I had taken my ankle out earlier when I put the walking foot. So I'm going to pause the camera because I can't reach around the camera otherwise. So I have put my free motion foot in the machine, and just a reminder, I need to tighten it a bit. These feet, some of the ones are spring loaded, some are not. Like this one is not a spring loaded foot. But when it is spring loaded, what happens is when the needle goes up and down, this little arm on the top of the needle bar will kind of make the foot hop a little bit. So in that case, again, if I had just barely finger tightened the needle clamp screw, that could vibrate loose. So just to make sure that every once in a while when I do free motion quilting, I kind of make sure that that needle is still tight so that my needle won't fall off in the middle of quilting. Other helpful tools that we have. Again, I'm showing some of my favorites. There are lots of other options available in the marketplace, but this is one of my favorite ones. I think this one is called So Slip Tape thing or whatever. There's different names, different manufacturers, but it's a little Teflon cover that I can put on top of my machine bed, because this one is slicky surface, so it makes it really easy to move my fabric for the free motion. And it also covers all these holes on my where my feed dogs are, even though I do drop my feed dogs, but I still have all these uneven sections on my machine bed. So I will just line up the hole on where my needle goes. These ones are available also with the larger hole, that you can use them with the walking foot too. So this will just have a little bit of a kind of tacky surface, and it'll just cling onto your machine bed or your extension table. I do have one really, really large one from Baby Lock. That one is called the True Glide Overlay, which is made exactly the size of the extension table for the Baby Lock machines. So that is another option. So depending on what I do, if I have a bigger quilt, I'd use that larger one. So other kind of handy helpers are quilting gloves. And mine are very old ones. I don't know if they even make these ones anymore, but these are not gardening gloves. They were actually sold as a quilting gloves. And these ones have a grippy surface, so that way it will kind of grip my top of the fabric easier, so it doesn't slide, because when you handle it, your fingers kind of get a little bit dried out from the fabric. So these are helpful. The machiners, the gloves that we sell in the shop are a little bit lighter weight, and they're not as hot. Those my old ones are. Then really one of my favorites, again, I tried different tools, and these are the ones that I use a lot. These ones, because I sometimes find that the gloves were kind of on the way a little bit for me. So this way is especially handy when you pull your popping thread on the top. I didn't have to take my glove out. So these ones are from Paula Reed, and again, I don't know if we still have this in the shop, but I'm sure we can still get them. When she was in the shop and she demonstrated this, and I tried them, and I was hooked with these ones. So there's a smaller one that I can put on the right-hand side where I don't have as much space, and then the larger one, and they're gonna have little finger spaces. But this just grip my top layer. So it's very easy. I can just pretty much move my fabric just touching my fingers. So I do use these ones a lot. Again, just try different ways. Sometimes the little finger grips, all kinds of different methods to use for that one. Because the purpose is that when we drop the feed dogs, we do not then have anything to move the fabric. So if I don't move the fabric myself, all the stitches get lumped in one spot. Depending on the machine, some of the ones we have a lever in the back of the machine that you have to pull to mechanically drop the feed dogs. On my machine, I'm gonna go on the screen, and I have just selected the straight stitch needle at the center at the moment, and then I'm gonna go on this drop down menu, and I have a little look like a sideways C. When I select that one, now my machine shows to use an O foot, which is the one I have in my machine. If I had used this stitch that is the piecing stitch in the middle, it'll tell me to use the C foot. Oops, sorry, I moved my camera. So that will just to tell that I can't move my needle from the center position, so that'll be a safe foot to use. I'm just going to use the standard straight stitch, and my feed dogs are dropped. Couple things happened when I dropped the feed dogs. My machine also, other than dropped physically the feed dogs, it also adjusts some of my tension system. Some of the machines like Aventuras and the Brother 3600, several models, they may have an other settings button that in addition for pulling the mechanical lever, then you also go on the settings to set your machine for free motion. So again, best to check the machine's manual to make sure that they use all the proper ways on that specific machine. So when we start stitching, we normally want to have the bobbin thread pulled on the top side. So I'm gonna just to lower my pressure foot and put my needle down, needle up, so I can pull my bobbin thread on the top side. And I could have used tweezers, but I just am going to use my fingernails to pick it up. And then we want to hold on those thread tails to tack it down a few stitches. So I'm just going to do kind of few stitches kind of close together. I just ever so slightly move. And then I can start going a little bit further out. And I could either bury these tails, or in this case, I'm just going to snip them out of the way. That way both sides will be looking good. Let's see if I can get a little bit better position. Kind of hard to do around the camera, so this will be most likely the worst free motion quilting you ever seen. So I could use my fingers, gloves, whatever I want to use. I'll be using these ones to move the fabric. Whenever you're doing the free motion quilting first, you tend to kind of start pushing really hard. Just remember, harder you push it, harder it is to move. So gentle kind of move will help it. And a good time to kind of take a frequent rest, drop your shoulders, just to take a deep breath, because it's in the beginning especially you get very tense. And yeah, good idea, take frequent breaks. So I do a little bit stitching, I walk away, come back and continue. Well, there's my imitation of a little bit of a meandering. It's not stippling because these little loops are further than 1/4 inch apart. That is supposedly the definition for stippling. But I was just moving my fabric different directions, and notice all I used was my fingertips. I didn't hold it really hard. Well, this was just kind of one of the things that we want to always do first, but it's not maybe the best pattern to do it. Why it makes it awkward a little bit to do the free motion quilting is that whenever I'm writing on a piece of paper, my paper is stationary and my needle moves. In this case, it's the opposite. My needle in this case, which is like a pen on a paper, my needle is stationary and my fabric is moving. So that's why it feels a bit awkward. So there are some exercises that are kind of helpful. So one of the things would be first to do just the straight stitches, kind of going forward and backward, front and then sideways, and then do the loopy loops. So let me do that one. So I'll go on this other part of fabric, and then I'll show you those ones. Okay, so I'm gonna so the first, instead of that's kind of, even though this is a small piece, I could easily rotate it. But if this is a large quilt, you can't rotate it very much because the quilt is hanging off. So try not to even rotate this fabric when you do this exercise, because that is more kind of imitating on the real life. So what I'll be doing in here, instead of trying to do fancy patterns, I'll be going just back and forth. So I'm just gonna go forward, and then forward and backward. So that kind of gives me exercise just to move in the fabric, just either way. And I'm trying to keep my stitches approximately the same length, which means that faster I run the machine, faster I need to move my fabric. I'm not a really fast quilter. I don't go pedal to the metal, but again, everyone has their favorite methods. So I kind of often especially start kind of slower. If I do more intricate shapes, I don't go too fast. But again, try different ways. Well, now that I moved it back and forth, now the next exercise, I'm going to move it sideways. And I'm trying not to rotate the fabric. I'm just going to move it sideways. And let me go on this end. Well, then another great exercise is doing little loop-de-loops, like letters, the script, L's and E's. And partly why that's a good exercise is that if you learned in a school to do script letters, that is at least in the school when I learned, we were doing the letters by moving the loop-de-loops. And try to keep those loops at the same. So that is a pattern. It's kind of like a muscle memory. We have it on our head. So we should be able to do that one a little bit easier. And you could even draw lines if you wanted. Obviously, I don't do it very good in here when I have a camera between my legs. But I try to make little loop-de-loops. And if I was really trying to do better, I would try to make them the same size. And then, of course, I could do just a kind of... just like a little waves. And then the next one, I'm going to try to do a box. It's just some basic exercises how I can try to get myself warmed up. So often if I haven't done free motion for a while, I just take a scrap of fabric and do a little quilting this way just to get the feel on it again. And then you could go into a little bit of a meandering, a little pebbles and a little other loop-tees. And then I even did a little free motion flower. You can tell I'm not a free motion quilter, but these are about the best I can do. Other one that you have sort of a muscle memory is your signature. And my signature really when I write it doesn't look like this one. But you could also do a signature using the free motion. So the best thing on the free motion is that do practice, practice, practice. Well, how do we finish this one? Sorry, I kicked the camera again. I'm going to get this one out the way. I'm going to lift my needle up, lift the pressure foot up, and I'm going to just take that thread tail. Again, this is a very small piece, so I could easily go under, but if this is a large quilt, I couldn't really go under. So I will take a little piece, and then I will put my needle down, and I can use my feed dogs on my foot pedal, and then I'm gonna pull that popping thread also on the top side. This little technique that the long arm quilters do, they kind of pull that popping thread on the top side, and then I can clip my thread tails, and then I have a nice stitching finished on both sides. So this was a very basic information about how to use the free motion quilting in a machine. Again, I'm not the best quilter for that one. I'm just trying to show some of the techniques in the machine that we can do. I'm going to show one other thing on my machine. Several machines that we have settings. And the settings is that, I don't know if you can see that one. The settings is the one that has a little notepad. When I set that's that one, I will get the place that I can customize my machine. And when I go on this one, I have certain ones that are affecting for free motion. Like one of the ones is free motion foot height. So what that one will help me do is, if I have a really thick quilt padding and my foot is sort of catching the top layers, it's hard to move it. I can go and change this foot height on this one. The default is always on a black background with the white letters, so I could even go a bit further down. Most kind of quilt patterns, these thin cottons, the default works perfect, but if I have really thick quilt sandwich, I could use some of the other settings also. Then other thing that affecting on the quilting side, when I have the machines that we have the dual feed, I can adjust the dual feed, the belt. So if my belt was still not pulling the top layer the same amount as my bottom one was feed dogs were pulling, I can make my belt run a bit faster. On my machine, I guess the last time I was doing some quilting on Annie's Soft and Stable, which is very, very slippery kind of foam padding. So I found that on that padding, my top layer was still creeping a little bit towards me. So I adjusted that one. I put it +3, so my belt was taking a little bit more fabric on the top side, so that way my top and bottom lined up perfectly. So I can go up to 10 on that, or if I have the opposite, if my top is taking too much, I can even hold it back a little bit. So I may go back to 0 on this one just for the next time when I do a test. So there are a couple of settings on my machine that I affected also kind of relevant for the quilting. I had one foot that I want to also demonstrate. This one is not really a quilting foot. Well, it is listed in the package leather quilting foot. And it was also designed to sew on leather because it has a big roller and it goes on the top of the feed dogs. So it will just easily take on the leather, and we can do some meandering and rotating the fabric fairly easily because it doesn't cover the whole feed dogs. It's just that roller goes over that most left feed dog. But we can also use that for quilting. It's just a kind of a slow meandering kind of lines. So it's sort of like a free motion with the feed dogs. So that's why I call it a hybrid. I have selected a straight stitch and I put the needle at the left position. So I'm a little bit closer to that wheel. But before putting this foot on, a couple of notes. It is a low shank foot and my machine uses high shank feet. So I needed to use the adapter. So I have the adapter with the screw, and that's where the roller foot will be then attached to. Other also is the thing is in here, do not use your built-in needle threader when you have this foot on, because if I now use the needle threader, it's gonna hit this foot and it can possibly break the needle threader. So this one, use your needle threader before you put the foot on, or manually thread the needle. Very, very important. Do not push the needle threader button when you are when you have this foot on a machine. So I'm going to lower the pressure foot and I'm going to do some stitching, and I'm just kind of slowly meandering around this piece. See, it is fairly easy for me to go around. Oh, there we go. Again, I can't make super tight curves, but it lets me do a little bit of a curves. Go. So that was just another option that we could use sort of as a quilting. I'm gonna sew one more last thing. We also have in our machine some of the stitches that are very, very wide and could possibly be used also as a quilting method. Just one note about these, because I do get questions about that, these stitches. And machines that have the sideways movement, under the character decorative stitches, we have several really, really large stitches. And how these are formed is that the machine moves the fabric sideways and forward and backward, all kinds of directions. But we have some of these sort of a stippling meandering stitches also built on this one. Important things to look on this one is that it tells to use the foot end, not the walking foot. We can't use any of these stitches with the walking foot or the dual feet, because the walking foot would not let the fabric to move sideways. And it is important that I will use the end foot, because the end foot, the sides are a little bit smoother, a little bit more rounded. So it makes it easier the fabric to move sideways. The J foot, they are a little bit sharper. So that's an important that we use the end foot, and then so we can't use the walking foot, which means that your fabric may shift a little bit. But some of these stitches work great if you are using them on a border or satin, that you may have done a stitch in the ditch first on both sides, so the edges are anchored pretty well, and then you can do stitching. So on these ones, like on this specific one, I'm looking that it starts kind of in the middle. So if this was my satin, I would line up my fabric to start in the middle, and then I can let the machine to move the fabric sideways. We have some other stitches that work pretty well. This one in here is a really large stitch. Well, this starts stitching more from the side. One thing to note about that, it doesn't look that big at the moment, but there's a little number that shows, it says 50%. This one is showing at the moment 50% of the actual size. So if I wanted to see the full size, I will touch this little picture that look like a little piece of paper with the stitches on it. That shows the actual size of this stitch. So it is a pretty large stitch. Again, this one would start stitching from the left hand side. So I would know that I would need to use my fabric on that side. So that allows me to have a closer look how those stitches will look like. So I'm going to do a demo using this one on my piece of fabric. Okay, I'm on here, my little piece of fabric left where I can do some stitching. I guess I could do on this part too, but I think I have enough there. So I'm gonna put my foot somewhere in the middle of this this section of my my fabric, and I will just start stitching. So see how the fabric is moving sideways, and all I'm doing, I'm gently guiding it, just keeping it parallel, but otherwise let my feet dogs to do all the stitching. Go a little bit faster on this one. And there's gonna easily tendency to try to help it, but if I help it too much, I'm gonna cause a little bit of a mix up on a pattern. So all I'm trying to keep it just kind of roughly parallel. So these are stitchings that can definitely be used on some of the sashings and the borders of a quilt or wall hanging. So let me stop there so I can show that one. So here's my little sort of a stippling stitch that I had done using the feed dogs and the end foot in the machine.